He always believed that their love was strong and their marriage honest. But in the last moments of her life, his wife confessed what she had been hiding all her life. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. The year was 1955. In a world divided by color, the United States still clung tightly to the chains of racial segregation. Jim Crow laws dictated where a black man could walk, eat, sit, or even look. Interracial relationships were not just frowned upon, they were dangerous. A black man caught in the wrong place with a white woman could be beaten, imprisoned, or worse. The South was particularly cruel in its enforcement of these unspoken rules, but the North, though less brutal, was still no haven. Oliver Bryant had learned these lessons young. Born into poverty in a small southern town, he had spent his life watching men like his father struggle under the weight of a system designed to keep them down. His father had been a factory worker, his mother a tired woman who spent more time scrubbing floors in white homes than in her own. Oliver had worked from the time he could walk, fixing cars alongside his uncles, learning the way engines breathed and groaned under the weight of labor. By the time he turned 18, he had become a mechanic in a small auto shop, one of the few jobs where a black man could earn an honest living without serving a white boss face to face. Oliver was tall and lean, his skin dark as polished mahogany. He had a quiet confidence that unnerved white men and intrigued white women, a dangerous combination in the world he lived in. But Oliver had never been foolish enough to entertain such dangers. He had seen what happened to black boys who let their eyes linger too long on white skin. That was until Sarah Whitmore. Sarah had never known poverty. Born into a prominent white family, she had spent her childhood in silk dresses and expensive shoes, her days structured by etiquette lessons and social events designed to mold her into the perfect Southern wife. Her father, Charles Whitmore, was a man of influence, a businessman whose wealth came not just from investments, but from the power he held over others. He believed in bloodlines, in purity, in the superiority of those who shared his complexion. But Sarah had never felt at home in her father's world. She had grown up suffocating under the weight of expectations she did not wish to meet. She was supposed to be quiet, obedient, demure. Instead, she was curious, restless, always searching for something beyond the perfect life laid out for her. The night she met Oliver, she was 18 years old. The summer heat clung to her skin as she slipped into a dress she had been told was too bold, too revealing. The air smelled of whiskey and cigarette smoke as she entered the dimly lit basement, where the music of rebellion played, jazz, smooth and electric, notes curling around the edges of segregation like whispers of defiance. The party was one of the few places where color lines blurred. Young people, black, white, and everything in between, came together in secret, sharing drinks, laughter, and glances that could never be exchanged in daylight. It was there that Oliver first saw her. She was nothing like the white women he had been warned about. There was no fear in her eyes when she met his gaze, no hesitation in the way she moved toward him. Her blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, her blue eyes alight with something dangerous, curiosity, excitement, defiance. She asked his name. He hesitated, she smiled. And suddenly, Oliver found himself speaking, his voice low and careful, as if testing the air between them. They talked for hours, their words slipping into the space between them with ease. She was fascinated by the world he came from, the way he spoke, the way he thought. He was wary but intrigued by her boldness, by the way she seemed untouched by the fear that governed his own life. It was intoxicating. It was foolish. It was inevitable. When the night ended, she told him she wanted to see him again. He knew he should walk away, but he didn't. The first time her father saw them together, it was an accident. Oliver had been working late at the auto shop when Sarah appeared at the edge of the garage, her pale skin illuminated by the glow of the street lamp. His heart clenched as he glanced around, his pulse hammering in his ears. She shouldn't be there. It wasn't safe. But before he could usher her away, a black car pulled up to the curb. Charles Whitmore stepped out. The world seemed to stop. Oliver saw the moment realization dawned in the man's eyes, the way his face twisted in rage, the way his body tensed with the kind of fury only white men had the privilege of expressing. Sarah tried to speak, but her father silenced her with a glare so cold it could have frozen the summer air. Then, without another word, he grabbed her by the arm and dragged her away. Oliver didn't move. He knew better than to follow. The next morning, he found a note slipped under the door of the garage. "Stay away from my daughter." It wasn't a warning. It was a threat. And for the first time in his life, Oliver realized that he was not afraid of white men like Charles Whitmore. He was afraid of what he was willing to risk for Sarah. The next few weeks were hell. Sarah was forbidden from leaving the house. Every move she made was watched, every phone call monitored. Her father refused to speak to her, as if acknowledging her existence would somehow taint him. Her mother said nothing, only watching her with unreadable eyes. Sarah tried to fight. She argued, she screamed, she begged, but her father's will was law, and there was no court that would side with a daughter who dared defy the man who owned her world. And yet, she found a way. A letter slipped into the pocket of a delivery boy, a whisper in the ear of a maid who had once known love beyond color lines. A meeting, late at night, when the world was asleep. She found Oliver again, and this time she told him what he already knew. Her father would never let them be together. But she had made her choice, and she had chosen him. It was a reckless decision, a dangerous one. A white woman running away with a black man was not just scandalous, it was criminal. There would be no mercy, no understanding, no forgiveness. But love had never cared for laws, and so, in the dead of night, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the fire in their hearts, they ran. They ran from the chains of her father's power, from the weight of a world that would never accept them. They ran toward a future that had no guarantees, no promises, no safety. Only the hope that, together, they could carve out a life of their own. They had no idea that the real danger had only just begun. The night air was thick with the weight of their decision. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the small suitcase she had packed in secret, filled with only the barest essentials. A dress, a few coins, a photograph of her mother that she wasn't sure why she had brought. It was absurd how little of her life she could carry with her. Everything she had known, her home, her name, her status, she was leaving behind. Oliver stood at the edge of town, waiting beneath the shadows of the abandoned train station. He had no suitcase, no photographs. His whole life had always been light enough to carry. When she saw him, she wanted to run to him, to throw herself into his arms and let the fear fall away. But she held herself steady. There was no time for softness, no time for hesitation. They had only one chance to disappear. The train that would take them north was due within the hour. It was a freight train, bound for a factory town in Illinois, where mixed-race couples were rare but not illegal. It was their best option. Sarah glanced behind her one last time, half expecting to see her father's men storming toward her, dragging her back to the life she had just abandoned. But the streets were empty. Still, the fear lingered. Oliver took her hand, rough, calloused, steady. "Are you sure?" His voice was quiet but firm. Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. They boarded the train, hiding among crates and sacks of grain. No one saw them leave. No one knew where they were going. For the first time in her life, Sarah was free. The journey was long and grueling. They traveled in darkness, their bodies stiff from crouching in the narrow space between cargo boxes. The sound of the train wheels rattled through Sarah's bones, each clank a reminder that there was no turning back. Oliver barely spoke. He was always listening, always watching. Every time the train stopped, he tensed, waiting for the sound of approaching footsteps, for the doors to slide open and reveal men with guns ready to tear them apart. But no one came. On the second night, they reached Illinois. The factory town was a far cry from the elegant streets of Sarah's childhood. The air was thick with smoke, the streets lined with soot-covered buildings, the people weary from long hours of labor. But here, they were just another couple. No one looked twice at a white woman standing beside a black man. It wasn't acceptance. It was indifference. And indifference was enough. They found a place to stay in a cramped boarding house where the walls were thin and privacy was non-existent. Their room was barely big enough for the narrow bed they shared, but it was theirs. Oliver took a job at the local steel mill, working 12-hour shifts in unbearable heat. Sarah found work as a seamstress, her fingers blistered from long hours of stitching. It was hard, grueling, and nothing like the life she had known. But she never complained, because for the first time she had chosen this life. The marriage took place in a tiny church on the outskirts of town. There were no guests, no flowers, no music, just the two of them and a preacher who barely looked at them as he muttered the vows. There was no ring, no celebration, just a quiet exchange of promises, spoken not for the world, but for each other. When the ceremony ended, Sarah stood outside the church, staring up at the sky, feeling the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She was no longer Sarah Whitmore, daughter of privilege. She was Sarah Bryant, wife of a black man in a world that would never fully accept them. And yet, she felt lighter than she ever had before. The first year of marriage was a test. The factory town was safer than the South, but that did not mean it was kind. Oliver's co-workers kept their distance, uncertain what to make of the man who had arrived with a white wife. The women in the town looked at Sarah with wary eyes, unsure if she was lost, confused, or simply foolish. They were tolerated, but never welcomed. Money was always tight. Some nights they went to bed hungry. Sarah learned how to mend clothes until they were more stitch than fabric. Oliver learned how to stretch every dollar, bargaining for scraps at the market, working overtime until his body ached. But they endured, because love had carried them this far. And yet, love did not erase fear. Sarah's father had not forgotten her. Letters arrived at the boarding house, each one colder than the last. The first was a demand, "Come home, now." The second was a warning, "You don't understand what you've done." The third was a threat, "You will regret this." Sarah burned them all, but the fear lingered. Her father was not a man who accepted defeat. One day he would find her, and she did not know what he would do when he did. That fear crept into her dreams. It whispered in the back of her mind when she walked through the market, when she saw men in suits glancing at her too long, when she heard footsteps behind her at night. And so, without telling Oliver, she began to save money. At first, it was just a few coins tucked beneath the mattress. Then, a few bills hidden in the hem of her dress. She told herself it was nothing. just a precaution. A habit born from fear, not from doubt. But deep down she knew the truth. She had chosen Oliver, but part of her still feared that one day she would have to leave him behind. The years passed, and life in the factory town settled into a pattern. It was never easy, never truly comfortable, but it was theirs. Oliver worked himself to the bone, coming home each night with aching muscles and soot-stained hands. Sarah stitched clothes until her fingers bled, her once delicate hands now rough with calluses. They built a life together, piece by fragile piece. And then the first child came. Sarah had never been more terrified. She had expected joy, had imagined the moment she would place her newborn in Oliver's arms and feel the warmth of their family growing. But when she saw the tiny boy wrapped in blankets, she felt something else entirely. Guilt. Because as she looked at her son, she couldn't stop thinking about the child she had abandoned. She had been 17, a different girl in a different life. Her family had kept the pregnancy a secret, hiding her behind closed doors, telling friends and relatives that she had taken ill, that she needed rest. She had never been given a choice. When the baby was born, a boy, just like this one, she had barely been allowed to hold him before he was taken away. Her father had arranged for everything. A quiet adoption, a discreet payment to ensure there would be no records, no connection to the Whitmore name. Sarah had cried for weeks, but in time she had learned to silence the ache. She had told herself that it was for the best, that the child would have a better life without her, without the burden of scandal. And then she had met Oliver, and she had buried that past beneath a new life, a new love. But now, holding her newborn son in her arms, the past clawed its way back. She had another child out there, a son who had been lost before he even had a chance to know her. She never told Oliver. She couldn't. The weight of that secret settled into her bones, a quiet, gnawing guilt that never fully left her. Their son, Isaac, grew fast, his skin a rich blend of his parents' colors, his eyes sharp like his father's, his smile soft like his mother's. He was the first thing they had ever truly built together, a living testament to their love. And yet, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She dreamed of the child she had given away. She wondered if he looked like Isaac, if he had her nose, if he had Oliver's steady gaze. She wondered if he ever thought of the mother he had never known. She never spoke of it. Instead, she buried it deeper, and she devoted herself to Isaac, to Oliver, to their life. But the past had a way of creeping back even when you tried to outrun it. Years passed, and another child came. Margaret. She was wild from the start, loud and unafraid, her laughter filling the tiny rooms of their boarding house. She had none of her mother's softness, none of her father's quiet. She was a force unto herself, a storm in a little girl's body. Sarah adored her. But with each passing year, the secret grew heavier. She imagined the boy, now a young man, living in some unknown city, perhaps in a house much like theirs, perhaps wondering who he was. She prayed that he had been given a good life. She prayed that he had never felt abandoned, and she prayed that Oliver would never find out. But secrets had a way of poisoning everything. Sarah became quieter, more distant. Oliver noticed. At first, he thought it was exhaustion. Parenthood was hard, and their life was not an easy one. But then he saw it, the way she would stare off into the distance, lost in thought. The way she would hesitate before answering questions about her past. The way she flinched whenever adoption was mentioned, even in passing. Oliver was not a man who pried. He respected silence, understood that some wounds were too deep to touch. But this was different. This was his wife, and she was slipping away from him. One night, long after the children had gone to bed, he found her sitting at the small wooden table in their kitchen, staring at a torn piece of fabric in her lap. She didn't notice him at first, and for the first time in their marriage, Oliver felt a distance between them that terrified him. There were things she was not telling him, things she never would, and for the first time he wondered if he truly knew his wife at all. Sarah had always known that marriage was not the fairy tale that books and films made it out to be. She had known, even as a child, that love and survival were often two separate things. But she had never expected to live in a marriage built on both. Oliver was a good husband. He was steady, patient, reliable. He worked hard to provide for her and the children, never once complaining about the exhaustion that came with 12-hour shifts at the steel mill. And he loved her. She had no doubt about that. But she carried a secret that weighed heavier than any love could lighten. Because when she had married him, she had not done it out of love. She had done it out of fear. She had grown up knowing that her father would choose her husband for her. That was the way it was done in families like hers, old Southern money, bloodlines that traced back to colonial wealth. Women did not choose. They were chosen. Her father had spent years grooming her for marriage, introducing her to the sons of bankers, lawyers, businessmen. He had lined them up like racehorses, inspecting them for pedigree, for wealth, for the right kind of arrogance. And she had played along. She had smiled, nodded, let them take her hand, let them lead her across ballroom floors. She had done what was expected. Until Oliver. Until she had seen something different. A man who did not belong in her world. A man who made her question everything she had been taught. And she had run to him, not because she had loved him, but because she had been terrified of what her life would become if she didn't. The realization sickened her, because now, all these years later, she did love him. She loved the way he kissed her forehead before leaving for work each morning. She loved the way he rocked their children to sleep at night, humming low and deep like the rumbling of the earth itself. She loved the way he never raised his voice, even when he was angry. She loved the way he made her feel safe. And yet, she had never told him the truth, that when she had married him, it had not been a choice of the heart. It had been a choice of survival. She told herself it did not matter, that love had come in time, that it made no difference how their story had begun, so long as it had led them here. But then came the whispers, not from Oliver, but from the world around them, from the women in the market who still looked at her as though she had lost her mind, from the men who sneered when Oliver passed them in the street, from the children who asked questions she didn't know how to answer. Mama, why do some people look at Daddy like he don't belong? Mama, why do the other kids say I'm different? Mama, why don't Grandpa ever visit? And she had no answers, because the truth was ugly. The truth was that she had spent so many years trying to forget where she had come from that she had never stopped to think about what it meant for her children to live in the space between two worlds. And worst of all, she had never told Oliver. She had never told him that in those first months, when things were hardest, when she had been exhausted and scared, she had thought about leaving. She had looked at the money she had hidden away, had counted it over and over in the quiet hours of the night, wondering if it was enough to take the children and disappear. She had never planned to do it, but the fact that she had considered it at all haunted her. Oliver was no fool. He saw the way she avoided certain questions. He saw the way she hesitated when he asked about her past, the way she grew quiet when their children spoke of race, of belonging, of the things that set them apart. And he wondered, not just about her secrets, but about her love. Did she love him because he was her choice, or because he had been her only escape? It was a question he was afraid to ask, because he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Sarah had convinced herself that the past was behind her. She had built a new life, a family, a home that, while modest, was safe. The world outside their walls still looked at them with suspicion, but inside they had found something close to peace. But peace was fragile, and the past had a way of creeping back when you least expected it. The first letter arrived on an ordinary afternoon. It was slipped under the door while she was out shopping, a thin, white envelope resting on the wooden floor like a ghost from another life. She stared at it for a long time before picking it up. There was no return address, just her name. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her father's. Her stomach twisted as she tore it open. The words inside were short, cold. "You do not understand what you have done." She felt sick. It had been years since she had last heard from him. After she had run away, he had sent letters demanding that she come home. Then letters threatening her. Then nothing. She had thought that meant he had given up. She had been wrong. For weeks she waited for another letter, but none came. She tried to push it from her mind, but the weight of it settled in her chest like a stone. What did he mean? Was it just another attempt to control her? Or was it something worse? She told herself not to worry. But then she saw the man. It was early evening. She had taken the children to the market, letting them chase each other between the stalls as she bartered for potatoes and fresh milk. And then she saw him. A white man in a suit standing at the corner of the street. He wasn't buying anything. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was watching her. A chill ran through her. She told herself she was imagining things, but the next day she saw him again. And the day after that, always at a distance, always watching. She didn't tell Oliver. She knew what he would say. "You're seeing things. You're worrying over nothing." Or worse. "If it is your father, we need to face him." But she didn't want to face him. She just wanted him to stay in the past where he belonged. And then the second letter came. This one was different. It was not from her father. It was from someone she had never expected to hear from again. "I know who you are." Her heart stopped. She read it again. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The message was vague, but she knew. Someone had found out about her first child, about the son she had abandoned all those years ago, a secret she had buried so deep it had nearly been forgotten. And now, someone new. She felt the walls of her world begin to crack. For days, she said nothing. She barely slept. She barely ate. Oliver noticed. He asked her what was wrong. She told him it was nothing, but he knew better. And when he found the letter, crumpled and hidden at the bottom of her dresser drawer, she could see the shift in his eyes. A realization that there were things about her he had never known, and maybe, after all these years, he didn't know his wife at all. Sarah had always known that the past would catch up to her one day. She had spent years convincing herself that the life she had built was separate from the one she had left behind. That the woman she had been, the privileged daughter of Charles Whitmore, the girl who had been too afraid to fight for her first child, the young bride who had run into Oliver's arms not out of love but out of desperation, had disappeared. But the truth was, that woman had always been inside her, hiding in the corners of her mind, waiting for the moment when she would be forced to face everything she had buried. And now, as her body betrayed her and the weight of time pressed down on her bones, she knew that moment had come. The sickness had started slow, a cough here, a dizzy spell there, nothing she had taken seriously. But then the pain began. A sharp, relentless ache in her chest that stole her breath, that made the simplest movements unbearable. Oliver noticed first. He watched her struggle to lift the iron pot from the stove, saw the way she winced when she thought no one was looking. At first, he said nothing, but one night, when she collapsed on the floor while folding laundry, he knew they could not ignore it any longer. The doctor came the next morning. He was a white man, middle-aged, his face unreadable as he pressed his fingers to Sarah's wrist, listening to the rhythm of her pulse. He asked her questions, nodded at her answers, frowned at her silence. When he spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. She had seen that kind of calm before. The kind that softened bad news, that pretended kindness while offering no solutions. She was dying. It was her heart, he said, weakening, failing, nothing to be done. Oliver stood in silence, his hands clenched at his sides. Sarah closed her eyes. She had expected fear, but all she felt was exhaustion. She had been running from so many things for so many years. Maybe it was time to stop. Oliver refused to accept it. He spent days searching for another doctor, another answer, another hope. But the answer was always the same. Her time was running out. And she knew more than anything that she could not leave this world without telling the truth. She had spent a lifetime keeping secrets. It was time to set them free. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, she asked Oliver to sit with her. He hesitated at first. There was something different in her voice, something final. He was afraid, not of her dying, but of what she was about to say. She told him everything, about the money she had hidden away, about how, in the early years of their marriage, she had doubted him, had doubted their life together, had feared that one day she would need to escape. She told him about her first child, the son she had abandoned, the life she had erased. She told him about her father, how, even in death, he had managed to haunt her, how she had never truly been free of him. And finally, she told him the worst truth of all, that she had not married him for love, that she had married him because she had been afraid, because he had been her escape, not her choice. Oliver sat in silence. She could not read his expression, could not tell if he felt anger, or pain, or nothing at all. She felt the tears slip down her cheeks, felt the weight of a lifetime's worth of guilt pressing against her chest. And then she told him the only thing she knew to be true, that despite everything, despite the lies, the secrets, the mistakes, she had come to love him, truly, deeply, more than she had ever thought herself capable of. She loved him, and she hoped in the end that would be enough. The days blurred after that. Oliver said little. He took care of her. He held her when the pain was too much, wiped her forehead when the fever came, carried her to bed when her legs could no longer support her. But he did not tell her how he felt. She did not ask. She did not need to know, because in the end, it did not matter. He was still there. And for her, that was enough. One night, as the cold crept through the house and the weight of her body became too much to bear, she felt Oliver's arms around her. He whispered something, so soft she barely heard it. And as she closed her eyes for the last time, she smiled, because she knew in that moment that he had forgiven her. Or maybe he hadn't. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe love was not about perfection. Maybe it was about choosing to stay, even when it hurt, even when the past could never be undone, even when goodbye was the only thing left to say. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that settled into the walls, into the space between breaths, into the weight of a body that would never rise again. Sarah was gone, and Oliver sat in the silence of their bedroom, staring at the empty space beside him, at the pillow that still held the faintest imprint of her head. For days he had not moved it, as if by leaving it untouched he could trick himself into believing she was still there. But the truth was inescapable. She was gone, and she had left him with a lifetime of secrets. Her confession had broken something inside him, not because she had lied, but because he had never truly suspected, for all of the years they had spent together, for all the moments they had shared. He had believed in her, believed that their love had always been real, that it had been built on trust, not necessity. And now he didn't know what to believe. Had their life been a lie? Had she ever really chosen him, or had he only ever been an escape, a refuge, a way out of a life she did not want? He had spent his whole life fighting to be seen as a man, in a world that called him less than, that told him he was never enough. And now, even in the place he had called home, even in the arms of the woman he had loved, he questioned whether he had ever truly belonged. The letters were still there, the ones from her father, yellowed with age, tucked away in the drawer where she had hidden them, the threats, the warnings. And then, the last one, the one that had shattered her in those final weeks. I know who you are. A different handwriting, a different fear. She had never told him what it meant, but now he had to know. He opened the drawer, his fingers shaking as he pulled out the stack of old papers, unfolding them one by one. The last letter was brief, a single sentence. Your son is looking for you. Oliver froze. The room tilted. He read the words again, his breath catching in his throat. Their son. Not Isaac, not Margaret. The one she had given away. The one he had never known existed. His hands tightened around the paper. There had been another child. Another piece of her that she had kept from him. A son who had been out there searching for answers. And now she was gone. And all that was left were questions that could never be answered. Oliver sat in the silence, staring at the letter, at the truth of a life he had never truly known, and for the first time since Sarah's death, he let himself grieve, not just for her, but for the life they had built, the life he had thought was real, the life he now realized had been filled with ghosts. The house felt different without her. It wasn't just the emptiness, the absence of her voice, the quiet rustling of her movements as she folded clothes or hummed to herself in the kitchen. It was something deeper. It was the weight of all the things left unsaid. Oliver had spent decades believing he understood his wife, believing that the love they had built was real, unshakable. Now, in the days following her death, that belief was crumbling like sand slipping through his fingers. He sat at the kitchen table, the letter in front of him. Your son is looking for you. The words felt like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Sarah had been carrying this truth for years. She had let it fester inside her, let it eat away at her. And she had never told him. Oliver clenched his fists, staring at the faded ink. How could she? How could she sit across from him at the dinner table every night, knowing she had another child in the world? How could she watch their children grow and never once speak his name? Had she planned to take this secret to the grave? She had confessed so much before she died. The money, the doubts, the fact that she had not married him for love, at least not at first. But this she had kept, and now Oliver was left to deal with it alone. Isaac and Margaret didn't understand. They were grieving too, but their pain was different. To them, Sarah had been a mother, steady and constant, the center of their world. To Oliver, she had been more. She had been his partner, his home, the woman he had fought for, the woman he had trusted more than anyone else in the world. Now, he wasn't sure what had been real and what had been a carefully constructed illusion. Was love still love if it had started as a lie? He didn't know, and he wasn't sure he wanted to find out. Days passed. Oliver worked because it was the only thing that made sense. The steel mill didn't care about grief. It didn't care that his wife was gone, that his world had shifted beneath his feet. It demanded the same thing every day: his sweat, his strength, his time. That, at least, was simple. But nothing else was. Not when he walked through the market and felt the weight of strangers' eyes on him, their silent questions hanging in the air. Not when he lay in bed at night and reached for her out of habit, only to find the sheets cold and empty. And not when he opened the drawer and saw the letter waiting for him, taunting him with the truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. One evening, after the children were asleep, he sat at the table and unfolded the letter again. There was no name, no address, just a single brutal fact: a son, out there, looking for answers. And Oliver was the only one left to give them. He wrestled with it for weeks. What good would it do to look for this boy, this man, now? What did he owe a stranger who had never been a part of their lives? But then another thought came. What if it had been Isaac? What if someone had taken his son from him, erased him, made him a secret? Wouldn't he want to know? Wouldn't he deserve to? And so, one morning, before the sun had fully risen, Oliver left the house. He walked to the post office, the letter clenched in his hand. And for the first time since Sarah's death, he made a decision. He would find this boy. He would give him the truth that had been stolen from him, even if it hurt, even if it changed everything. Because the past had already taken too much, and Oliver wasn't going to let it take anything more. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. Share this video with your friends and let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you're looking for more captivating stories, check out our other videos. See you in the next